Thanks to all the participants for signing up to this talk today. We have named the talk, What Do You Know About Your Data, Metadata and Persistent Identifiers at the GESIS Data Archive. So I've been told we have plenty of time, so I will try to explain a lot, but nevertheless, if you have questions, please keep them until the end of the talk and we will try to answer them afterwards. So this is first an overview about the data services for the social sciences, which is the department that we're working in. You see the three teams that we have about archiving, about data acquisition and access, and metadata standards and interoperability. So today we're going to talk about metadata and persistent identifiers. The topics that we cover is, after a short introduction about the general purposes of the data archive, we go into the selection of standards that we use, how we deal with conversions to exchange metadata with other organizations, and I will show you also some example applications that we have. And then there's an overview about the workflows, how we proceed with data that is being deposited at the data archives. And then my colleagues will take over talking about challenges, and especially in the area of digital behavioral data, how we are processing those. So you might know that at the GESIS Data Archive we have currently more than 6,500 datasets archived. They are mainly from the European region, but also a bit across that. You see here the numbers of studies from different areas and also from different political and economic topics that we have assigned to our study descriptions. So this is mostly survey data, but also includes some media data or process data, and I will show you later how we work on those. So what the data archive usually does when data is being deposited, we create study descriptions, or at least we help researchers to create those, and we offer them to deposit the data with us for long-term archiving and secondary use data access for third parties. So this involves a lot of help that we give to the researchers for data documentation, because that can be at different levels. So from an easy description of an, let's say, SPSS or Stata dataset, up to more detailed, richer documentation of survey questions or methodologies. So sometimes that can be very complex documentation, especially with some of the data collections that you see here, like the ALBUS, ISSP, Eurobarometer, and so on. So we also sometimes give advice for research data management that is not with the data that is deposited in the archive. But our main goal is to increase the visibility and to keep data archived for the long term so that it can be reused. So some areas are also served by special purpose portals or groups within GESIS that take care of special collections. And but overall, we try to integrate that as much as possible into the general purpose documentation that we have. So the standards that we use for document those data is usually based on DDI-Lifecycle at the moment. We started in some years ago with DDI-Codebook, which is the predecessor, but we wanted to select a very broad basis that covers a lot of things, so that we can do everything on this basis, and DDI-Lifecycle provides this possibility. So at certain points, when we have special things, we extend this and combine this also with additional standards. and I will show some of them later on. And technically, we deal with the DDI FlatDB approach, which is actually a database that contains all the metadata for our studies in the DDI format, but in a way that we can access it easily. The DDI standard is formulated in XML language, and the FlatDB approach makes it possible to process parts of it. So this is a really nice thing that we have, and I will show later in the workflow how that is connected to the other tools that we use at the archive. So the other standards that we also use, I have mentioned some of them here. For example, the ISO standards for date, time, and country. That may seem very basic, but it's important for exchange of metadata that these standards are being applied in a consistent way. Otherwise, you cannot exchange that with other organizations. For example, for the CESSDA group of archives, we exchange it on the so-called CESSDA metadata model, which is a DDI compliant model, has some reduced content, but this serves the CESSDA data catalog, and so we need to convert our data that we have to this to go into the data catalog. Another application is the use of the DARA and DataCite metadata schemata. The DARA registration agency offers to create DOI persistent identifiers, and the data archive always registered persistent identifiers for each specific version of a dataset. So for this we need to convert the metadata into the DARA schema. And from DARA, it is being sent to the DataCite consortium so that it can be searched and accessed from these services as well. Within all those metadata schemata, we use controlled vocabularies for certain fields, like for example, analysis unit. Is a list of options that we apply, and this makes it possible to have a consistent use of descriptions over several systems. And we also use a lot of controlled vocabularies from the DDI community. So we also do version management of our study description. That means if a dataset has an update or if the documentation is being improved, we have a new version that will always go hand in hand with a new DOI, so that you can, as a researcher, when you download a dataset, you can cite the exact version of data that you have been using. The management also involves change management because, for example, the ISO countries, they change over time. This is something that doesn't change so often, but other things like the DataCite metadata schema or also the CESSDA metadata schema, they also change over time because people incorporate improvements, and it's important when you have applications based on this, that you always know exactly which version you're talking about. In addition to that, we recently have also been doing crossworks to other standards, like being used in a semantic web and RDF area. The SCOS format is a simple knowledge organization system, and it allows also to connect the metadata that we have to other metadata out there that also use those ontologies. On our website, the data is enriched with schema.org information, also derived from our metadata that we have, and that is also important because datasets should be FAIR, which stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. And there are also tools, I will mention this later, to assess the fairness of your data, and we want to have our data as fair as possible, and that is usually involving to publish the metadata in schema.org or JSON LD format. Then also we have other connections like in the European Open Science Cloud, the OpenERA format or the DCAT format are being applied, so that all needs to be included into the crosswalks that we have. Also for specific topic classifications, we are using the European Language Social Science Thesaurus, ELST, and also other thesauruses as appropriate. And that is not always being applied to the whole collection of datasets, but sometimes only to specific collections. So I have included this slide here for you to have some resources. So we have done some years ago a report about DDI-Lifecycle at the Data Archive, and that describes exactly how we use the metadata format with specific tools, and also how we do the mapping between different formats. Also, there's the URLs to DDI-Codebook and DDI-Lifecycle, and the CESSDA controlled vocabularies that we use. And we have the links to the DARA metadata schema and the DataCite metadata schema that we currently use. And also there's the link to the Fuji tool that automatically does an assessment of machine readable properties of the FAIR criteria. And that's something that we currently investigate to make our data much better documented according to the FAIR principles. I've already mentioned that this also involves a lot of mappings or crosswalks between the different standards, and I will not go into detail now, but this is usually very important to make this efficient, because if you have selected one metadata standard as the basis, then you can say from there I do an conversion to a much easier format so that you can publish the data to portals, and that's what we currently have also automatically included. But sometimes those mappings involve decisions about semantic meanings, and a title in one schema may not the same as the title in another one, and this is something that really needs to be managed over time. So I promised to show some example applications, but I will do that only in a brief manner. For example, we have the study description editor that we call DBK Edit, which is a MySQL application, and so this is the software that we use to document all the study description metadata. And that is being exported to DDI-Lifecycle for our DDI flat storage, but also it is exported to the DARA system for registering the DOI, and also it's being exported to a Solr index that is being used by our GESIS website search. And so this is just an example. You have a study number and title and some group assignments, some version information and data collection information and so on. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. And this is the screen, how it looks on our website when you have found this, for example, this ISSP dataset here. You have an abstract and you can read all the metadata out there. For the level of dataset documentation and the questionnaire documentation that we have for our surveys, we use a program called DSDM. It stands for Dataset Documentation Manager, and is a Microsoft Access application. We use it to import the SPSS version of the dataset and then add all the variable level information, also questions from the survey instrument, and also we can do that in several languages. And from there we create also the exports for our search system and the publication in other databases. So this looks like this. For a study, you have a list of variables on the left, and you can assign questions, and those questions have a lot of text and answer options and so on, like being normal in surveys. So this is how the publication of variable information currently looks like. We have integrated that into our GESIS search. So you can apply some filters on top. So I have selected here now the International Social Survey Program, and then you see all the variables down there. You can also apply other filters to find interesting variables. And all this is integrated into our production workflow. As a researcher who deposits a data set with us, you can select different levels of deposit options. And then depending on that, it is being processed with the metadata production tools that you can see here at the bottom line. So the DBK edit program, I showed it for the study description. We also have the Sovidata Netatorium application that is a self-deposit system where researchers can describe the data themselves. That is based on a program called DSpace. And then I have shown the dataset and variable documentation in DSDM, which is optional, but usually being used to improve the level of detail. And all this goes into our FlatDB metadata base, and from there we can publish it to the portals that you see on the top. So for example, at the DARA website or at the DataCite website, you can search for our data. It comes from there. We have the GESIS search, and we have also the Sovidata Netatorium. Zakat is outdated. That was an application also for variables, so we are currently moving that and to our GESIS search portal, and we're enhancing that step by step. And we also want to do that with others so that we have only a single point of access. So what we have is we have this common metadata storage to feed many applications, which is very valuable. But we still have some legacy editor tools that we need to apply to fill this store. So we are in the process of migrating that. We have an integrated search and access for end users, and we still require for some functions specific portals for some sets of data collections. So we currently do not all support all metadata versions because we only publish the latest version to the web. So you can still refer to previous versions, but the metadata that you find on the web is always for the latest version of a data set. And since last year, we are working on introducing a new software called Collectica, which is a DDI-Lifecycle software, and this allows us to do an integrated documentation of both study level and variable level, and this will be integrated into our workflow for study and variable documentation and publishing on the web.
All right, thank you, Wolfgang. So from what you've heard so far, you probably got the impression that GESIS is well equipped and also very experienced in working on metadata and providing good metadata for your data sets. And this is definitely true, but nevertheless, that also doesn't mean that we do not face challenges. And some of these challenges we have listed here. So, for example, facing a higher amount of data, a wider variety of data, and so on and so on, more exchange of data, metadata, multilinguality of metadata, also expectations of fast provision and access, and also complying with various standards, also such as the FAIR criteria. And one area where this is all quite exemplified in a way is the area of digital behavioral data. So if you maybe click to the next slide, Wolfgang. So this is the area where I mostly work at, and the challenges that come from there, my colleagues Wolfgang and Kokila have to deal with. So just very broadly speaking, our new area of digital behavioral data encompasses or is defined of digital observations of human and algorithmic behavior. But to make it more concretely, what are examples of digital behavioral data? So a very large area is social media data. So data that comes from various social media platforms, just as Twitter, which is now X, but also Facebook data, Instagram, and so on. But also other areas, just as web tracking tools that we have at GESIS, where we can actually track what people are browsing on the internet, but also other things like sensor data or geolocation data. And maybe if you now go to the slide before again, if we actually look at the challenges, you can see that this is probably quite a thing in this area. So, for example, a higher amount of data is definitely true. So if you compare that to what we are mostly used to deal with at GESIS, which is survey data, it's a lot easier to sample your own data set for example, social media data, if you have the experience and the technical skills to do web scraping. You have a wider variety of data, so compared to the usual data sets that come from survey data, these data sets look quite different. And also the other things, complying with FAIR criteria is a thing that is quite different for all of the different data sets from digital behavioral data sets. So you can actually see, okay, we are facing some challenges here. And if you now go further 2 slides, one more, to make it actually very concrete, you can see that we are facing challenges if we want to describe our DBD data sets appropriately with the metadata that we already have at GESIS. So here we can see especially the challenges of having had a focus on survey data for decades at GESIS. So on the one hand, some metadata is just not relevant for DBD. So you can see here, for example, quite explicitly mentioned survey metadata. So survey period start, survey period end, for example, is obviously not quite adaptable to digital behavioral data, where, for example, if you collect, say, Twitter data, you might have a period where you collect the data, but that might not be the same period the content of the data is from. So that might be just different from a survey period where you just have a very defined period where you collect or where your survey is fielded. And we go one slide further. Another thing is that there's just relevant metadata to describe digital behavioral data that is missing. And one example here might be the data collection mode. So you can see here again various options that applied to survey data. So telephone interview, email interview, you name it. We have a very wide variety to describe these things. But for example, when we do web scraping or use an API to actually collect data, we currently lack those fields to describe the data appropriately. And I will now hand over to my colleague Kukila, because she is dealing with how to actually address this kind of data appropriately.
Thanks, Jan. Thank you for explaining digital behavioral data in detail and some challenges that we are facing right now with DBD. If you could move a slide. Yeah, thanks. I would like to talk about the metadata for digital behavioral data. So apart from social media data that we have also web tracking data that was a part of digital behavioral data. And since GESIS is working with survey data previously, so we have, apart from the survey data metadata, we also have some metadata that is more relevant to describe DBD data. For example, we have user ID or an identifier. An identifier is a unique value that can be assigned to a user as for example, user ID, or maybe relevant to an event that we are looking into. For example, in case of Facebook post, it could be post ID. In a Twitter tweet, it could be a tweet ID. So these are some identifiers that we are interested in. Also, we have a location metadata, which is the geographic location of a device at a particular event we are looking into. Then we have device information and platform information. These are the characteristics and attributes of the device that has been used, for example, for a particular post or a tweet. And the platform information could include the operating system, the version of the operating system, and so on. Talking about data collection period, as Jan mentioned, that it's different from the survey context. So we might be collecting data in 2023, and the data we are collecting is from 2018 to 2020. So it's something different for DBD. And talking about mode of data collection. So from survey data, it's different because we are mostly collecting the DBD data through APIs and web scraping, which is quite different from what we have for survey data. Next slide, please, Wolfgang. Yeah. So Wolfgang has already talked about control vocabulary. So talking about it in more detail, it is a list that can clearly define an exclusive set of values that we have for a specific context. So taking an example from DDI control vocabulary, we have aggregation method. So we have only a fixed set of values that we can select for this particular control vocabulary. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. Looking into future, like way forward, we would like to propose new control vocabularies. For example, we do not have control vocabulary for platform that we are looking the DBD data from. So it could be control vocabulary platform, and then the set of values that we have for the platform could be YouTube, Wikipedia, Twitter, and so on. Also, with some of the applications, we would like to update to the latest version of control vocabularies. For example, the DDI's control vocabulary for mode of collection, which is the latest version is 4.0.3, has options for web scraping and API as well. So this could solve a lot of our problems related to DBD data. And coming to conclusions, what we need to do is we have to use this common store that we feed all our metadata to feed the remaining applications that we have in our workflow. Also, to evaluate the state-of-the-art tools to manage the metadata workflow, also more integration for the end users. We need to look at how we would manage the different versions of control vocabularies, and also keeping in mind that metadata schematas and control vocabularies would be changing. We need to include the convergent functions into the concept. And also we need to look at all the aspects apart from standards. We need to look at the software tools we need to use, workflows, conversions, and content. So to meet the challenges for more heterogeneous and larger volumes of data, we need extended content, also need to look into the additional standards, more exchange, more language support, and faster access. That would be it from my end. So if you want to contact any of the speakers, we have email addresses here for you. Also, you can reach to GESIS for any consulting related to survey data design methodology, archiving, DVD, and stuff. Also, you can visit our website for our available services. And talking about the upcoming sessions of Meet the Experts, the next session would be on 9th of November on an introduction to domain-specific data infrastructures for the DPREX project. So you can find it in the link below. That's all from our end. Thank you so much for participating, and we can now move to the Q&A session, and we would be happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.